Channel Red Novel, Chapter 1521, Flying Balls. Come on, do you really expect us to believe that? Conan asked, right after Bliss had revealed the information. This is a demon-tier beast we're talking about, and I've never seen her in my life. What rank are you even? Conan was referring to her traveler rank, the different colored tags that they would have around their neck that would prove to others the rank they had obtained. I don't have a rank. I was in the military academy long before the Civil War broke out. She answered honestly, and thought there was no need to prove herself to some nobody. Still, what exactly did Bliss mean by her statement? Was this a vision that she had actually seen, or did she just want to stir trouble? Does she know that I have the demon-tier weapon on me? There should only be a handful of people who know. I can't imagine that information might have leaked. However, if she does know, then I could see why she would think with me there's a good chance of subduing one. But does that really mean she can see the future? Damn it. Conan sat back down, hearing that as a reply. We are all going to die. Although Conan might have been the only one to audibly complain, deep down, the others that had come along in this journey felt the same way. Since the start it had sounded like a suicide squad, but they had at least hoped the military might have had a secret weapon or something. As it turns out, though, they apparently chose to trust a crazy lady. Only a few seconds later, the outside of the vehicle started to rumble, and a loud sound had come from the left side. It was clear that they had been hit by something. Hey bro, did you do that? Brooke asked. Are you a jinx or something? Just when you say we're all going to die, beasts appear. Hey, now's not the time to be pointing fingers. Besides, shouldn't our psychic Bliss over here seen it coming with her powers? The traveler refused to take the blame for this coincidence. While the two were arguing, Rafer was on the move, heading to the control panel, and pressing a button that would open the vehicle up. The tires stopped in place, and out from the sides the vehicle anchored itself in the ground, shooting strange devices from under the vehicle itself. After that, a small little energy blast was sent out in all directions like a bubble around the vehicle. It was a defensive measure that would allow them to get out safely and deal with whatever the problem was. As the back opened up, the group rushed outside to see what was going on. Bliss was the only one who walked out casually, unfazed by that had just happened. The first thing the group noticed as they stepped onto the black, charcoal-like ground was the fact it was hot. They could feel it on their feet, even through their beast gear. It was similar to the feeling of walking on a sandy beach with bare feet, with the sun being out. They needed to move or the pain would get to them. This was because of the type of planet they were on. The two shelters were placed on a leveled black ground, and most of the surrounding space was the same, but the whole planet wasn't like that. There were certain parts that were filled with molten lava from the ground below. Even now in the distance they could see mountains of lava flowing down the side of them. In the ground itself, although not on the surface, they could see part of the ground cracked with heat waves and little embers coming out as well. Immediately, everyone started to move due to the heat that could be felt on their feet, and they could soon see what had attacked them. There, balls. Floating pair of balls. Conan said as for some reason, when lifting his crossbow, he was hesitant to shoot at it. The beast looked like two giant balls stuck together floating in the air, and he felt like if he were to hit such a thing, he would begin to feel pain in a certain area. Soon, though, they turned towards him, and a single large eyeball could be seen on each of the balls. Ah, it's hideous. Conan shouted and immediately shot out an arrow from his crossbow, hitting it square in the eye. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to kill the beast. The next moment, the strange tentacles that were attached around the balls started to fire out fireballs towards him in a rage. He managed to avoid most of them with ease, but soon more attacks were coming towards him from the others. The beasts had surrounded the vehicle, and there looked to be around 30 or so of them. Conan would roll on the ground, and fire at those closest to him. He proved that his crossbow was a mighty weapon. While he didn't manage to hit each beast in their eye, they would still get pushed back a few feet, giving him time and distance to fire at another one. Brooke had taken out the 2 sickles, and hopped from side to side, not allowing any of the flames to touch him. He had attempted to strike the ball from below, but the balls would just spin along with the hit, trying to minimize the damage. So instead, Brooke decided to cut off the tentacles that were firing the balls of fire in the first place. Finally, there were the other 3. Berg didn't have any problems. When the flames hit his body, they did next to no harm. If he timed it right, he could even hit the flames back at the beast that would even hurt them when being hit. There was Bliss, who even though stood still, not a single one of the flames were hitting her. Finally, there was Erin, who hadn't used her demon tear blade, though she was showing off with her blood weapon. The damper pretended to struggle against one of the beasts at first, before bisecting it so fast that it had no time to react. She had expected to see blood, yet there was something else inside. Its insides were glowing, not just that, but the energy was getting larger by the second. An explosion went off. The bang was heard and had destroyed part of the ground Erin had stood on, but when the smoke settled she looked to be fine. Using the second stage of Chi, she had learned she managed to shield herself from this explosive attack, but this was certainly a strange thing. And that's when all of them could see, since they were unable to kill the humans in front of them. The floating pair of balls started to shake violently. They then started to glow, and it looked like all 20 of them had decided to self-destruct. "Everyone, gather around me," Bliss called out. She had been drawing a large circle with her staff on the ground. The others listened and got inside, including Rafer, who had been observing how well the others were doing. Mainly just using a beast shield to stop the flames. When they got inside, explosion after explosion went off one after another, and no one could see a thing, but they realized that none of them felt pain. Bliss' staff was lit up, and she had created a barrier that had protected them all from the attack. Now there were no more beasts on site, and at least the vehicle they had arrived in looked to be okay as well. "Phew, that was a close one. I guess I should be thanking you," Conan said, as he was constantly hoping on the spot to make sure his feet didn't get too hot. Brock and Rafer were doing the same, but for the others the same couldn't be said. Conan gave them a look as to wonder why they didn't feel the same way. Berg, he could understand. "It's an active ability of my armor equipment. I knew what type of place we were going to after all," Bliss explained, seemingly having read his mind. Since they were safe, Erin already started to head back to the vehicle to get a move on. In her case, the reason she was fine was due to the demon tier weapon. Just being next to it was giving off this cooling effect on her body. It was the perfect counter to this type of environment. When getting back on the vehicle, Rafer had made the decision that they would camp for the day. The military officer drove the vehicle to a safer area. One that was away from the heated spots of land, and was at the foot of a mountain that wasn't spewing lava. He asked Bliss if it was okay, though she just gave him a smile and nodded. The vehicle had beds on the other end and were stacked on top of each other like a large bunk bed. Erin was sleeping on the bottom bunk and on the other side was Bliss. However, before both women went to sleep, the damper had decided to approach the god. "It's clear you're not normal," Erin said. "I don't understand it, but I can tell you're special. I also have a feeling you're not actually lying, which is why I'm asking you. No, I'm begging you. Tell me, is there a way to stop the future that you saw from happening? Is there a way to stop what is happening to me?" Channel Red Novel Chapter 1522, Come to our table. Before asking the question, Erin made sure that the others were busy. No one seemed to be paying them any attention, and Rafael was the first one on guard duty as he looked outside the vehicle's window while keeping an eye on the radar equipment. The group would take turns during the night so all of them would get some type of shut-eye. The worst thing that could happen was if a demon tier beast suddenly attacked them in the middle of the night. Just in case, though, seeing how careful Erin was being, she stood up and walked towards the back of the vehicle to a small table where the kitchen cooking area would be. Berg noticed this but decided to ignore it and close his eyes. For two people who don't like each other, they sure do talk a lot. By the next second, he was asleep. It was his talent to sleep within seconds no matter what time of day it was or worry he had in his mind. I can't help but notice that you're worried about my earlier words. Bliss started the conversation. I remember every single word, Erin replied as she clenched her fist. Heed my warning, as two sides that didn't know of each other come together to defeat an enemy the other created, the whole world will learn about them. At that moment, something will break the trust and bond between those two, and a new chaos will destroy the other. You will become that chaos. Those were your exact words. Erin hadn't made a single mistake when repeating back what Bliss had once said because, since that day, she had been repeating the phrase over and over again. Two sides that come together to defeat an enemy the other created. It looks like this part has already come true. You must know that the vampires were the ones that created the Dalki. And now the humans and the vampires have come together. Since your first prediction turned out to be true, I'm now worried about the second part. You said I would be the chaos that destroys the other, it's the vampires. I have the urge to kill vampires, and that's what you meant. She stopped there, waiting for Bliss's response. It took a moment before the latter eventually replied. I don't know if that's the case, Erin. The future has changed, and I do things to prevent the future. However, don't you think there is a middle section that you have skipped over to some degree? The Dalki have yet to fall. Perhaps you trying to change your fate will even change this part, but who knows? What I can say is this. I don't have an answer for you, but I have knowledge that might help you find your answer. The vampires are beings created by a god who resides on the other side. Now you might think I'm crazy saying all of this, but hear me out till the end, and then you can make up your own mind. You, yourself, were created from a vampire, yet you have the urge to kill those who created you. You can bypass the laws and powers that were set by those beings and gods that created you. Your existence is nothing less than a miracle, and that is why the vampires are so scared of your kind. And because of this, even the god that created vampires will be after you. To God, you're an existence that must be hunted down because you have the power to rise to his position or to even rise above him. You have the potential to go beyond a vampire and reach his level. If you try to fight what you are and what you have become, you will lose your life. But maybe you shouldn't be fighting it, perhaps to overcome it, you need to accept it. If you don't, then it also means that you will never reach that place, and you will be running for the rest of your life. I would suggest, even though I shouldn't, that you should strive to become a power. I want you at our table, and I assure you, you will be alright. Bliss stood up there with nothing else to say, but it didn't seem like she was running away this time, and her words had left Erin with a lot to think about. As time went on, Berg woke up. It was dark outside, and he was rubbing his eyes. He took a peek below him and noticed that Erin still wasn't in his bed. Don't tell me she is. Berg thought, looking over in the direction where he had last seen her before she had gone to sleep. There he could still see her on the sofa, not having moved. I wonder if she fell asleep. Oh well, not my problem. Berg thought, closing his eyes again, and a few seconds later, loud snores buzzed from him. Sometime later, Berg started to wake up, but it was because he could hear sound creaking from above. He imagined that it was due to another going on watch duty. Turning to his side, he decided to ignore it. As for the person above him, it was none other than Conan. Walking on the floor, he was making his way towards Erin. I could feel it from before. Conan thought as he walked towards her. There is a chill whenever I'm next to her. At first, I thought it was coming from her, but then I realized it was from whatever she had wrapped up. The huge sword usually left on Erin's back was currently on the sofa next to her, leaning against the sofa. A weapon that's able to sustain the user in a heat like this. It has to be of a high tier level. He thought as his temptation had reached the better of him. Turning over again, Berg opened his eyes, wondering if Erin was still there, and that's when he saw Conan's hand reaching out, attempting to seize the sword. What are you doing? Berg cried. Hearing this, Conan jolted forward and grabbed onto the cloth material. Simultaneously, Erin turned her head. She had fallen asleep at some point. Ag! Conan started to scream in shock and confusion upon noticing what was happening to him. The scream had woken up everyone in the vehicle, and when they moved to see what was happening, they saw ice that was slowly spreading up to his arm and was freezing his entire body. It took a few seconds, and when the ice encased his whole body, it shattered into hundreds of small pieces. I told him his death would be cold, Bliss grunted, looking at shattered ice, which was Conan a few seconds ago. It seems your sword did not find him worthy. Your weapon is a picky one. Take pride in that. My weapon did that? Erin was still in a stupor, but what else could it have been? Without a doubt, it was the weapon's potent freezing powers. Erin claimed that she wasn't the one who acted against Conan. Luckily, due to Bliss's prophecy from before and Berg as a witness, the others didn't need much convincing about the whole thing. It was clear that he was the cause of his own death. However, it also meant that Erin now could no longer hide things. She took off the cloth from the large blade, and now Rafer immediately recognized its shape in its sheath. It was the demon tier weapon that Oscar had once carried, and now it was in the hands of Erin. I can assure you, I didn't steal this, it was given to me. You can confirm with Samantha if you want. Erin said. No worries here, besides, now I understand why we have a chance of beating this demon tier beast. With the demon tier beast in her hand and the words from Bliss yesterday, the group was now confident to go out and hunt for another demon tier beast. Channel Red Novel Chapter 1523, Two Demons. The situation looked dire for the main Greylash family. From the initial large strong attack force, only a few were left alive, whereas there was still a third of the enemy side left. However, Owen did still have one trump card up his sleeve. The humanoid Dalki, it's strong. Nikyu might be a loudmouth, but he is not a weak vampire, yet it only has a few scratches of blood. It would be a mistake to regard these new Gen 4 spikes on the same level as the older ones. Owen thought. I just hope Grandfather and the other groups are okay. Just when they were on their last legs, that was when Nate had noticed a fierce blonde beauty running from the side. Swinging her sword, a tunnel of ice came down. It froze a few of the Dalki, and with large slashes of yellow aura and strength in every swing, she had managed to kill 3 of the humanoid Dalki without breaking a sweat. Who is that? One of the surviving vampires of the first family questioned. They could smell that Erin was somewhat similar to a vampire but didn't recognize her appearance. They also had no idea who it was from the looks. That was until her hair started to change color, turning from a blonde into black, and her eyes began to glow. It was a trait of a damper, when next to other vampires, for their hair color to change. Although Erin had learned how to control it, that required her concentration, and in the midst of battle, she couldn't afford to lose focus. Everyone, this is our only chance. Whatever second wind you have in you, we have to attack now. Nate shouted at the top of his lungs and was ready to with his shield. Nate knew some of the abilities that the demon tier sword held. He also knew that there was a cooldown after using the first skill. The second one was practically useless in this situation, which was why he had decided they had to act now. Since Erin had made such a grand entrance, the 4 and 3 spikes had turned their head towards her. This gave a chance for the vampires, Nate and Nikyu, to go out on the attack. 5 vampires, all wielding swords similar to Nikyu, had charged in together. They were aiming to take out whatever Dalki they faced as quickly as possible. A slash in one's stomach, Nikyu then twisted the hilt of the sword and infused his blood powers, making a large hole. Before the Dalki could act, the other 5 of Nikyu's men leaped and stabbed it with their swords, into the Dalki's arms. Grabbing his hilt, Nikyu used all his strength and blood aura to pull the sword up, slicing the Dalki's head in half from his stomach and finishing it in one spot. Now, he could see the humanoid Dalki that hadn't gone towards Erin, the one that had given him so much trouble from before. You! Nikyu pointed his sword towards him. The humanoid Dalki looked towards them and smiled, seemingly accepting the challenge to go for another round. As he charged towards the first family leader, its legs grew in size, mainly around the thigh area. They were now larger than his torso, and his former speed seemed as if had just been warming up. However, before it could reach Nikyu, a flash of lightning came down, striking directly at the top of the Dalki's head. It hit perfectly just behind his neck, and a metal fan was seen digging deep into the Dalki, crashing it into the ground. Soon, Nikyu could see Owen standing there. "I have to deal with this. I have failed my family, allowing too many of them to die. This one is mine," Owen declared. He held his metallic fan and pulled it apart with his bare hands, split into around 12 different metallic pieces. His fingers were still electrified and the current was passed through from one hand, going through each part of the fans to the other, making them stay in place. Swinging his arms downward, the fan pieces split out, and hit the ground, making a circle around him and the Dalki. They started to glow blue and an electric current passed through each of them. Now, around the Dalki was a makeshift arena spread to look like an electric fence. "I know you can probably just storm out of this place, but you Dalki are warriors, you should have some pride, so let's just make this a fight between the two of us." In the meantime, a little away in the massive crater, Eren could see a group of 4 Dalki charging towards her. She gripped onto the handle tightly as she thought back to that time. The entire group were sweating and panting after having defeated such a colossal monster. Its body laid there in the background. Ice tunnels everywhere and ice all around. Rafer had been injured quite badly, yet he was still alive, and the others didn't look much better than him. Bliss was currently the only one that wasn't out of breath. She had created a safe area for all of them, so their wounds wouldn't worsen by the surrounding heat. "You want to know where to go next, don't you?" Bliss asked, looking at Eren. "Take the crystal, and use it to strengthen your powers. They will need you in this war." Thinking back and seeing the Dalki run towards her, Eren twisted the hilt of her large sword, and something strange happened. The color of her blade started to change slowly, going from a white and blue metallic shine, turning red. The edges on both sides and the inner rings all started to glow red at the same time, and a strong heat was emptying from the sword. Pointing it towards the Dalki, in front of her, one of the rings on the sword was activated, showing the first active skill was being used again. The next moment a large tunnel of fire appeared on the battlefield. It hit the Dalki straight on, and just like with the ice, anything that touched the tunnel of fire, would soon be covered in flames. Nate, who was coming in to help, couldn't believe it. The Dalki's strong hide resisted flames, yet the power of the demon tier weapon was melting them in front of him. Since when could Oscar's weapon do that? Nate wondered. This wasn't an active skill of Oscar's weapon. This was the power of the other demon tier weapon that Eren had gotten her hands on. After being told what planet to go to, and what to do, Eren had taken the beast crystal. The others wanted to complain, but they really couldn't. It was undeniable that her contribution had been paramount to obtaining the crystal. Besides, who could stop her in the first place? Searching far and wide, she had eventually found someone who could do something with the demon tier crystal. It wasn't a humanoid one like her current one, so she thought it would be weaker. However, the forger was inexperienced, and the best he could make out of the crystal was an attachment for her sword. It was one that would go onto the hilt for better grip. When she had come to pick up what she had assumed to be another weapon, or at least a piece of armor, only to see that, Eren had almost killed the forger. Fortunately for him, he had been quick enough to tell her to try it out. She had tried to figure out what effects the hilt had. After testing, these were the results. Every single effect that the sword had, and its active skills, had been altered slightly. Instead of ice, she could use the power of flames. The power wasn't lacking, either. Twisting the hilt of the sword again, a click would be heard, and the sword would go back to how it once was. The cooldown for the active skills on the weapon were separate as well, allowing her to use 6 different active skills on her sword. Now she wielded the power of flames and ice on her weapon. She ran forward towards the incoming Dalki and slashed one of its arms. A yellow aura covered the blade, and a trail of flames were left behind as she swung down, cutting the arm. She was fast, and slashed again, killing the Dalki in front of her. Soon another one was approaching, and twisting the hilt, the blade changed. She stabbed the ground, and a trail of ice started to leave the ground and had reached the Dalki, freezing its feet. It was strong enough to break free, but it had slowed it down just in time. Not only had Erin gotten strength from the skill, her damper powers had grown, and she now had the stats of 2 demon-tier weapons. She was untouchable. Back in the fight with Owen and the humanoid Dalki, the two looked at each other, and the Greylash family leader was taunting the man, and he gathered a pure lightning bolt of power, holding it in his hand from the center like it was some spear. The Dalki didn't stop smiling, circling around the arena, and eventually charged forward. It was even faster than before, and rocks were chucked up from the ground itself. It readied its fist. With this power, I feel like I could destroy the whole planet. The humanoid Dalki said, believing nothing could survive its punch. Have you tried destroying a shell, though? Owen smiled. The marking on his hand started to glow. Channel Red Novel Chapter 1524, Unbreakable Shell. Since Erin could deal with whatever was coming her way and Nikyu had his 5 bodyguards fighting alongside him, killing the Dalki relatively quickly, Nate decided to make himself useful in other ways. He ran through the crater and, using his senses, tried to see if anyone was still alive on the battlefield. He was sure that there would be some at least. Although it seemed everyone had fallen after the fight, the Dalki didn't have time to check and make sure each one was dead. As Nate was going through the large crater that had become a battlefield, he saw devastating aftermaths and his hopes weren't high. There were bodies everywhere, with torn limbs, and most of them were crushed by just a simple step of the Dalki. He could even see armor that Dalki had ripped apart along with limbs. This fight, it wasn't a fight they could have won. The Dalki are too strong for this lot. Although Nate didn't want to admit something, even though the large army of around 100,000 couldn't do much, they were a big distraction for the Dalki, which was one of the reasons they were allowed to live. Nate's demon tier shield was strong, so strong that he was confident in battling with most Dalki, and even against a 5 spike, he had a chance as long as they didn't know what the shield did, of course. The battle becomes more unpredictable once the enemy learns of the shield's active skill. Still, when fighting multiple, the shield wasn't the best. Nate could make up for this with his shadow powers, but against 4 spikes, his shadow powers were at best able to block a couple of hits. The shadow power appeared strong at first, but that's mainly because people have only seen Quinn use it against overwhelming strength. It just isn't that useful. Finally, Nate detected a heartbeat. He immediately rushed towards the pile of bodies, started to shuffle through them, and pulled bodies off one by one, eventually pulling out someone who mainly looked fine. What is going on? I couldn't breathe. They were so heavy. The young man said while trying to catch a breath. What happened? Nate replied. The fight is still going on. They're too strong, but we can still do our part. Come on, help me look for other survivors. This war, as many as possible have to come back from it. Thinking back to what Sam had said, the Dalki had prepared 9 strong forces in their part of the solar system to counter the strong forces that the humans and vampires had in this war. As long as they had won this fight, they would have won one of the grand battles that were to take place. However, there was still the Dalki mothership and the dragon to go after, and on top of that, one of the forces on their side had pretty much already suffered a defeat due to one horn. Looking towards Owen, Nate was cheering him on inwardly. At that moment, the humanoid Dalki charged forward with its fist clenched. Its super speed amplified his natural strength to the max. There weren't many things that it would be unable to break if this fist hit them. But Owen could perhaps think of one thing. Don't let me down, Owen muttered as the lightning bolt mark on his hand lit up. The next second, and a large shell had appeared, only a little bigger than Owen himself. The legendary Genbu has appeared. The familiar shouted, looking towards Owen while its back faced the Dalki. Not worried, the Dalki slammed whatever was in front of it with its fist. A magnifying bang was heard, and a shockwave was sent outward. The others could feel the air's vibrations from such a mighty clash. Yet, when the Dalki looked at the shell, there wasn't a single crack on it. "This thing is a lot stronger than those shells I have already shredded," Genbu claimed. "Is this why you needed me? To stop weak attacks like this? I was worried that you might need me to stop others like that other kid." "No." Owen smiled. "That guy is one of a kind, and our current opponent is someone else." Owen leapt onto Genbu's shoulders as the turtle stood upright like a human. Honestly, Owen was surprised that Genbu hadn't even moved an inch, but it meant that what he had claimed was true. While Genbu and Owen had been together, he had asked what exactly he could do, other than having a solid shell and changing his size. The truth was, Genbu was actually a giant in size. His large figure was his true size, but his weight was still the same no matter how small he got and transformed his form down. The familiar could use this power to its advantage. With his added strength and ability, one would need the power to move mountains to move him. Owen held the pure lightning bolt as he saw the Dalki's fist was still on the shell, as if he was frozen in disbelief that something was able to block it. Owen aimed to kill, throwing the pure lightning bolt down towards the Dalki's head. But the Dalki snapped out of the daze and moved his head to the side, avoiding the strike, and the lightning bolt hit nothing but the ground. "This shell may stop my attacks, but you still can't kill Dash." Before the Dalki could finish its sentence, he saw the very same pure lightning bolt that Owen had thrown seconds ago in his hands. Around it, there was green blood which was now slowly evaporating. The Dalki noticed that there was now a hole through its stomach when looking down. The lightning bolt was able to be attracted back to Owen even after hitting the ground. "I can't let you die so easily, and I realized I was wrong in my assessment before," Owen stated as he gathered all his lightning powers in his other hand. The lighting continued to spread up to his shoulders as it burnt his sleeves, revealing his muscular arms underneath. With both of his hands covered in lightning, Owen shouted, "Genbu, now!" The next second, the turtle grew in size. It was happening quickly, growing so big it was already half the size of the entire crater. It then jumped on its feet, and it looked like it was ready to crush the Dalki. Seeing this, the Dalki was afraid that perhaps Genbu's sheer weight would kill him along with others in the crater. It was madness. Using his legs, the Dalki tried to run out of the crater, towards the fortress, as fast as he could, but just as quickly as Genbu grew, he suddenly shrank in size and headed right towards the Dalki. "Thank you, I needed you to get away from the others," Owen smirked at the Dalki. Genbu, now as large as a house, landed right on top of the Dalki, flattening it on the spot, and continued to shrink until he suppressed the Dalki lying just on his back legs. Then Owen jumped off Genbu and landed in front of the Dalki. Genbu's weight must have been immense if the four-spiked Dalki could not lift it off its legs even with its power. In fact, he felt as if his legs were most likely crushed. The Dalki was punching the ground, creating deeper craters underneath it until the pure lightning bolt stabbed it right through its hand. "Stop this," Owen shouted, stabbing the Dalki with the bolt again. He didn't do this just once, but several times, stabbing the Dalki's hand, again and again, each time creating a hole in his body. Owen wanted the Dalki to be incapable of moving his hands, and the power of Chi strengthened the lightning bolts. "I was wrong about you, you weren't as strong as a 5-spike, but those that you brought with yourself were also strong," Owen said, as he finally threw one last lightning spike directly at the humanoid Dalki, finishing it off, and at the same time he himself fell to his knees. "Genbu, my vision is so blurry, I think this might be it for me," Owen said, clasping onto the floor. Channel Red Novel Chapter 1525, Who I Am. A search through a vast battlefield, through endless corpses, would have perhaps taken weeks, and maybe even longer with just a single person, but with Nate's vampire senses, he could hear any heartbeat among them. In other words, there wasn't the need for him to check each one individually. Still, The stench of the blood was even getting to his nose now that he was no longer fighting. He had to make sure to hold himself back. Originally, he had planned to make it so the survivors would help him on his search to make it easier for him to search. After all, there were bound to be a few who would be close to death or need emergency medical care. He had already sent one of the survivors, who was in good condition, to head back to the ship, to grab some medical supplies, and return as soon as possible, but the rest of the survivors he had found were unwilling to leave his side. They were still scared since the fight was ongoing and wanted to stay by Nate's side. He was one of the few people who survived the fight and they knew he was strong enough to take these monsters on. Eventually, Nate managed to rescue a group of around 15 almost unscathed people. Some of them had even been pretending to have been injured or hurt, hiding amongst the dead. "You bastard! How could you, my friend, sacrificed himself while you dash?" One of the men shouted and grabbed the other by the scruff of his uniform. "Stop!" Nate shouted. "Of all times, now is definitely not the time to fight amongst ourselves." Continuing their search, they even found a few who had a few limbs missing. Still, they did their best to do what they could and even cleared an area for the injured outside of the large crater, placing them gently on the ground and waiting for help to arrive. Using the strength of the beast shield, Nate still had great strength along with his vampire powers to move things quickly, and once in a while, he would consume the blood of the Dalki to re-energize himself. Right now, the group of people had just placed their 10th injured but alive soldiers down in a cleared area. Commander Nate. The first young man Nate had found, named Jerry, spoke. "Do you think we can really win this war? For me, right now, it seems somewhat impossible. We aren't even on their main planet or base, and there were only 100 of them. I might look young. But I was also there during the First War, and I believe you were too young to take part. This fight, as to how we were so easily overpowered and could do nothing but watch helplessly as our abilities turned out ineffective against our enemy, felt a lot like the old war." Nate understood what must have been going through his mind because he also had the same thoughts. "I think the same way," Nate replied honestly. "However, there are times when I see people that make me think the opposite. Look at that." Nate turned back to the fighting field. They were on the rim of the giant crater, and down below, they could see that the fight was still going on. It was Erin, who hadn't given up, and just blocked an attack with her long blade, stabbing it into the ground. She soon pulled out her small blood blade and her chains as she continued to go through movements, pulling Dalki and smashing them into each other while slicing them with faster speed. She took out one quickly and hurried back to her large sword in the ground. She kicked the sword handle so hard that it broke out of the ground and flipped into the air. Then grabbing it midway with both hands, she swung it with flames cutting it in half. It was like watching a fiercely skillful and mighty warrior take out the Dalki one by one. It wasn't like Quinn who would overpower them, this fight gave a different feeling. And to the eyes of the humans and the others, what Erin was doing right now seemed achievable. While watching the fight, they suddenly saw a large shadow being cast over the large crater. That was because Genbu had just grown in size, but the shadow quickly went away as he started to shrink. A few minutes after watching everything, the group realized something as they looked below. The fighting has stopped, there are no more Dalki. We've won, we won. Jerry was the first to react, and soon the rest of the survivors screamed on top of their lungs and fell to their knees. It was a relief, as they felt something beyond the joy as they realized that they had managed to survive this war. Back on the ground, Genbu was still out in his human-sized form, and Owen was lying there flat on the ground, not moving for a second. "Ha, you are weak, but you are strong enough for me. Don't worry, you are not dead. If you were, then I still wouldn't be here," Genbu muttered. With no danger around, Genbu started to disappear, and the purple bolt tattoo appeared back on Owen's hand. Noticing that the battle had concluded, the group began to run down the crater to check on Owen and the others. Nikyu moved swiftly. Most of the vampires in the group were now dead, leaving only him with 3 others who were equally as hurt and bleeding with him. I can't believe those damn lizards were so strong, but it didn't help that everyone else died so quickly, Nikyu said, still huffing and panting. What he was even more amazed at, though, was Eren. She had come in such a short time and had taken out the majority of the 25 or so Dalki who were left, killing nearly 12 of them. Not only that, she had done it all on her own as well. "Sir, do you wish for us to gather the vampires and make a report back to the settlement?" One of the vampires asked while kneeling on a knee, still in pain. "We should perhaps gather our fallen. They have fought side by side with us. Then we will send them to the settlement for a proper burial, but this is not a loss," Nikyu said as he looked around and noticed Owen was on the floor, having defeated the new Gen Dalki. "This is a win for us, no, it is a win for the vampire and human race," Nikyu exclaimed with a smile. Nikyu had been stubborn. He had a distaste for humans, but where had that come from? It was mostly from his father's teachings and feelings that had somewhat passed on to him, but was that how he truly felt? From the small interactions with them all, he felt that the humans weren't bad. Seeing Owen defeat an enemy that he could not, Nikyu had nothing but respect for the former. Perhaps someday, the vampires and humans can work together. Turning his head around away from Owen, he soon saw a flash of red blood appear in front of his eyes. It was sudden, and Nikyu had no clue what was going on, but when the blood fell, he saw that all 3 of his men were dead and a sword covered in blood. It was the girl from earlier, and her eyes were fierce yellow as she walked over towards him. "A damper!" Nikyu shouted as he opened his mouth and bared his fangs towards the woman. He tried to get his sword but could barely move his hand, and before he could do anything, he suddenly lost his vision as his head bounced on the ground. Nate and the others, who were a little away but close enough to witness everything, stood frozen in shock. "Eren! What the F***ck are you doing?" Nate shouted at the top of his lungs and lifted his shield, ready to protect all those around him. She then turned around and smiled at them all with a tear running down her face. "I'm sorry, this is just who I am. I have to go. Thanks for watching and subscribe my channel."